Janelle, a hardworking mother who would do anything to protect her son, never imagined she'd have to defend him from the very people she trusted with his education. For weeks, she noticed her bright 6-year-old son, Daniel, growing quieter and more withdrawn, but he wouldn't say what was wrong. Determined to find out the truth, she decided to visit his school unannounced. What she discovered in that lunchroom broke her heart and changed everything she thought she knew about Daniel's teacher. Why was Daniel isolated from his classmates, surrounded by a cardboard cubicle and forced to sit in shame? How did Janelle's fierce determination to stand up for her son reveal the truth about the teacher's harsh punishment? Stay tuned to find out. And before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from today, and if this story of courage and a mother's love resonates with you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. As we delve into their world, we invite you to share your thoughts and experiences. Have you ever faced similar challenges? How did you overcome them? Your stories matter, and we want to hear them. Janelle was the kind of mother who never backed down when it came to her son's future. She was a single mother, yes, but she didn't let that label define her. Janelle worked 2 jobs to make sure her little boy, Daniel, never lacked what he needed. Her day started before dawn and ended late into the night, yet she always found time to check his homework, pack his lunch, and kiss him goodnight. To Janelle, education wasn't just about books and grades. It was about giving Daniel the tools he needed to become anything he dreamed of. She believed fiercely in the power of knowledge and wanted Daniel to have every opportunity she had. Even though their life wasn't easy, she did her best to make Daniel feel like he could reach for the stars if he wanted to. Daniel, her bright 6-year-old, was her pride and joy. His eyes sparkled with curiosity, and he was always full of energy, asking questions about everything he saw. He loved learning. Whether it was reading a storybook or figuring out how a toy worked, he had a natural love for numbers and always got excited whenever they counted together. Janelle used to smile proudly whenever Daniel brought home his schoolwork marked with stickers and stars, which told her he was doing well in class. But lately, something had changed. Janelle first noticed it about 2 weeks ago. Daniel had come home from school that day looking unusually quiet. Normally, he'd burst through the door talking a mile a minute about his day, friends, and all the fun things they'd done at school. But that afternoon, he just shuffled in, staring down at his shoes and dragging his backpack behind him. "Hey baby, how was school today?" Janelle asked, her voice light and cheerful as she bent down to meet his eyes. Daniel shrugged, still not looking up. "It was okay," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. Janelle felt a pang in her chest. This wasn't like him at all. She reached out and gently lifted his chin, trying to catch his gaze, but he pulled away, keeping his eyes glued to the floor. "What's wrong, sweetie? Did something happen at school?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Daniel hesitated, biting his lip the way he always did when he was nervous. "I just don't like school anymore," he finally said, his words coming out in a rush. Janelle's heart sank. "What do you mean you don't like school? You used to love it, remember? Is it the work? Is it too hard?" He shook his head quickly. "No, it's not that. It's the teacher. She's mean." Janelle's eyebrows knitted together. "Miss Franklin? What do you mean she's mean? What does she do?" But Daniel wouldn't say more. He just stood there, looking down at his shoes as if he wanted to disappear into them. Janelle tried to press him gently for more details, but all he would say was that Miss Franklin made him feel bad. It wasn't like Daniel to be this quiet, and seeing the light in his eyes dimmed like that made her worry more than ever. As the days went by, Daniel's behavior only got worse. He was no longer excited about going to school. Every morning was a struggle just to get him out of bed and dressed. His once bright smile seemed to have faded into a forced nod whenever she asked about his day. He didn't want to play outside anymore or talk about his friends. Janelle noticed that his lunchbox came back almost untouched most days, and he seemed to be losing the confidence he once had. The final straw came one night when Janelle was tucking Daniel into bed. She looked down at her son's small face, noticing how his eyes looked sadder than ever. "Daniel, you know you can tell me anything, right?" she said, brushing a curl of his hair away from his forehead. "If something is happening at school, I need to know." I just want to help." Daniel looked up at her, his little face so serious. He hesitated for a moment, then whispered, "Miss Franklin doesn't like me." Those words echoed in Janelle's mind long after she left his room. That night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Why would a teacher make her son feel like this? Daniel was a good kid, always polite and eager to learn. What could he have done to make his teacher treat him differently? Janelle knew she had to get to the bottom of this. She couldn't just sit by and watch her son lose his love for school, not without understanding why. If Miss Franklin was the reason for Daniel's sadness, then Janelle needed to see it for herself. So the next day, without telling Daniel, Janelle decided to visit the school unannounced. She wanted to see with her own eyes what was going on in that classroom and why her little boy, who once loved school, now seemed so afraid to go. She wasn't just going to accept that Miss Franklin was mean. She needed to know what that meant. As she walked to her car, her mind was racing with a mix of anger, fear, and determination. No one had the right to make her son feel small, to make him dread a place that was supposed to be safe and nurturing. Whatever was happening at that school, Janelle was going to find out. And if Miss Franklin thought she could get away with hurting Daniel's spirit, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. Janelle's heart raced as she walked through the school corridors, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. The lunch hour had just begun, and she could hear the distant chatter and clatter of utensils from the cafeteria. She had taken an early lunch break from work, determined to surprise Daniel with a visit and maybe bring a smile to his face, all while seeing what was really going on. As she approached the lunchroom doors, Janelle took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. She hadn't been able to shake off the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at her since dropping Daniel off that morning. Pushing open the heavy doors, Janelle was hit by a wave of noise and the smell of school lunches. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for Daniel's familiar face among the sea of children. She expected to see him sitting with his friends, maybe laughing over a joke or trading snacks. But as her gaze swept across the cafeteria, she couldn't spot him anywhere. Frowning, Janelle moved further into the room, weaving between tables filled with chattering kids. Then, in a corner of the lunchroom, she saw something that made her blood run cold. There, separated from all the other children, was Daniel. But he wasn't just sitting alone. He was enclosed in a makeshift cardboard cubicle, like some twisted version of a timeout corner. The sight was so shocking that, for a moment, Janelle couldn't move, couldn't breathe. As she drew closer, the full horror of the situation became apparent. The cardboard walls rose up around Daniel, effectively cutting him off from any interaction with his peers. It was as if he had been put on display, a living example of what happened to bad kids. But that wasn't even the worst of it. Sitting on the table in front of Daniel was a large plastic cup emblazoned with the bold letter D for detention. The cup might as well have been a scarlet letter, broadcasting to everyone in the lunchroom that Daniel was being punished. Janelle's heart shattered as she took in her son's posture. Daniel's head was bowed low, his small shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself invisible. His lunch tray sat in front of him, the food untouched. He looked so small, so vulnerable, so utterly defeated that Janelle felt a physical pain in her chest. Around Daniel's isolated table, other children whispered and pointed. Some giggled behind their hands while others looked on with a mix of curiosity and fear. The message was clear. This is what happens when you step out of line. For a moment, Janelle stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening to her baby, her bright, curious, loving little boy. But as the reality of the situation sank in, a wave of emotions crashed over her. Shock, heartbreak, and then rising like a tidal wave, pure, unadulterated rage. "Daniel!" Janelle's voice came out as a strangled whisper. At the sound of his mother's voice, Daniel's head snapped up. His eyes, usually so full of life, were wide with a mix of surprise and shame. "Mama!" he whimpered, his lower lip trembling. Janelle rushed forward, her hands shaking as she reached out to touch her son. "Baby, what is this? Who did this to you?" Before Daniel could answer, a stern voice cut through the air. "Mrs. Thompson, What are you doing here? Janelle turned to see Miss Franklin striding toward them, her face set in a mask of disapproval. The teacher's eyes flickered between Janelle and Daniel, a hint of defensiveness in her posture. Miss Franklin. Janelle's voice was low and dangerous, barely controlled fury simmering beneath the surface. What is the meaning of this? Why is my son isolated like some kind of criminal? Miss Franklin's lips thinned into a tight line. Mrs. Thompson, I understand this might look unusual to you, but I assure you this is a standard disciplinary measure for disruptive students. Disruptive? Janelle echoed, her voice rising. He's 6 years old. What could he possibly have done to deserve this kind of humiliation? By now, their confrontation had drawn the attention of everyone in the cafeteria. Students watched wide-eyed while other staff members hovered uncertainly nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Miss Franklin's voice remained cold and detached. Daniel has been consistently talking out of turn in class. He doesn't follow directions and distracts other students. This isolation period is designed to help him reflect on his behavior and understand the consequences of his actions. Janelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. She looked at Daniel, who had shrunk back in his cardboard prison, tears streaming down his face. The sight of her son so broken and humiliated fueled her anger even further. Consequences. Janelle spat the word out. For a child, your job is to nurture and guide him, not break his spirit. This isn't discipline, Miss Franklin. This is cruel and unusual punishment. Miss Franklin's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Thompson, I've been teaching for over 20 years. I know what works when it comes to maintaining order in my classroom. Perhaps if you spent more time. Don't you dare. Janelle cut her off, her voice trembling with rage. Don't you dare imply that I'm not doing everything I can for my son. I work 2 jobs to give him the best life possible, to make sure he has every opportunity to learn and grow. And this is how you repay that trust? By locking him away like he's some kind of problem to be hidden? The teacher's face flushed, but she held her ground. Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're upset, but this is a tried and true method. Daniel needs to learn that his actions have consequences. Janelle laughed bitterly. Consequences? Let me tell you about consequences, Miss Franklin. The consequence of this little lesson of yours is a child who's afraid to come to school. A child who used to love learning but now thinks he's not good enough. Is that what you wanted to teach him? She turned back to Daniel, her voice softening as she addressed her son. Baby, come on. We're leaving. As Janelle reached out to dismantle the cardboard cubicle, Miss Franklin stepped forward. Mrs. Thompson, you can't just... Watch me. Janelle snapped, her eyes flashing with determination. She quickly broke down the cardboard walls, tossing them aside. The loud crash as they hit the floor echoed through the now silent cafeteria. Janelle knelt in front of Daniel, gently wiping the tears from his cheeks. It's okay, baby. Mama's here now. You're not in trouble, you hear me? You didn't do anything wrong. Daniel nodded shakily, his small body trembling as Janelle helped him to his feet. She grabbed the detention cup from the table, holding it up for everyone to see. This ends now, she declared, her voice ringing out across the lunchroom. No child deserves to be treated like this. Not my son, not anyone's child. With a swift motion, she crushed the cup in her hand, the plastic crumpling under the force of her grip. She let the mangled cup fall to the floor, the sound of it hitting the linoleum punctuating her words. Miss Franklin's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating in the face of Janelle's righteous anger. Mrs. Thompson, please, let's discuss this in private. There's no need to make a scene. A scene? Janelle's laugh was without humor. You want to talk about making a scene? You put my child on display like he was in a zoo, and you're worried about me making a scene. She turned to address the room at large, her voice carrying to every corner of the cafeteria. I want everyone to listen carefully. What happened here today was wrong. It doesn't matter what a child has done. Nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies this kind of treatment. Several of the children nodded. A few of the other staff members looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances that suggested this wasn't the first time they had doubts about Miss Franklin's methods. Janelle turned back to the teacher, her voice low but firm. "This isn't over, Miss Franklin. I'll be speaking with the principal, the school board, whoever I need to make sure this never happens again. Not to Daniel, not to any child." With that, she took Daniel's hand and began to lead him out of the cafeteria. As they walked, she could hear the whispers starting up behind them, could feel the weight of everyone staring, but none of that mattered. All that mattered was the small hand in hers, the silent tears still falling down Daniel's cheeks. As they reached the doors, Janelle paused, looking down at her son. "Daniel, baby, look at me." Slowly, Daniel raised his eyes to meet hers. The pain and confusion she saw there broke her heart all over again. "I want you to know something," Janelle said, her voice gentle but firm. "You are smart, you are kind, you are important. Don't ever let anyone make you feel like you're not. Okay? What happened here wasn't your fault. It was wrong, and I promise you it won't happen again." Daniel nodded, a tiny spark of his old self flickering in his eyes. "I love you, Mama," he whispered. "I love you too, baby," Janelle replied, pulling him into a tight hug, more than anything in this world. As they walked out of the school, Janelle's mind was already racing, planning her next moves. This wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about every child who had ever been made to feel small, every parent who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. She would fight this battle not just for her son but for all of them. The sun was bright as they stepped outside, a stark contrast to the darkness they were leaving behind. Janelle took a deep breath, squeezing Daniel's hand. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She would not rest until she had made things right. As they walked to the car, Janelle couldn't help but think about all the other children who might have suffered in silence, all the parents who might not have discovered what was happening to their kids. The thought steeled her resolve even further. "Daniel," she said as she helped him into the car, "I want you to know something. What we're going to do next might be hard. People might say mean things, might try to make us feel like we're wrong, but we're not. We're standing up for what's right, and that's always worth it. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded solemnly, his eyes wide. "Are we going to help other kids too, Mama?" Janelle felt a surge of pride at her son's words. Even after everything he'd been through, he was thinking of others. "Yes, baby," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "We're going to help as many kids as we can." As she started the car, Janelle's mind was already formulating a plan. She would start with the principal, then the school board. If necessary, she'd reach out to other parents, gather support, and if that wasn't enough, she'd go to the media, shine a light on the darkness that had been allowed to fester in their school. This was more than just a fight against one teacher's cruel methods. It was a battle for the very soul of their education system, for the right of every child to learn in an environment of respect and dignity. As they drove away from the school, Janelle glanced at Daniel in the rearview mirror. He was looking out the window, his face thoughtful. She knew the road ahead would be challenging, but seeing her son resilient despite everything he'd endured, she knew it would be worth it. This was just the beginning. The discovery in the lunchroom had lit a fire in Janelle, a determination to create change, and she wouldn't stop until every child could go to school without fear, until every parent could trust that their child was being treated with kindness and respect. The fight ahead would be hard, but Janelle was ready. For Daniel, for every child. She would stand strong because sometimes it takes just one voice, one moment of courage, to start a revolution. And in that lunchroom, witnessing the injustice done to her son, Janelle had found her voice. Now it was time to use it. The next day, Janelle sat in the waiting area outside Principal Watkins' office, her back straight and her eyes fixed on the closed door. The events of the lunchroom still played vividly in her mind, fueling her determination. Daniel sat quietly beside her, his small hand clasped tightly in hers. The door opened, and Principal Watkins, a balding man in his 50s, emerged. "Mrs. Thompson, please come in," he said, his tone carefully neutral. As Janelle stood, she noticed Miss Franklin already seated inside the office. The teacher's face was set in a mask of cool indifference, but Janelle could see the tension in her posture. "Daniel, sweetie," Janelle said softly, "can you wait here for a little bit? Mama needs to talk to your principal and Miss Franklin." Daniel nodded, his eyes wide with worry. Janelle gave his hand a reassuring squeeze before following Principal Watkins into the office. The principal settled behind his desk, gesturing for Janelle to take a seat. "Now, Mrs. Thompson," he began, his voice placating, "I understand you have some concerns about our disciplinary methods." Janelle's eyes narrowed. "Concerns? Mr. Watkins, what I witnessed in that lunchroom goes far beyond concerns. It was cruel, humiliating, and completely unacceptable." Miss Franklin cleared her throat. "With all due respect, Mrs. Thompson, you're not an educator. The methods we use have been proven effective in maintaining order and discipline in the classroom." Principal Watkins nodded. "Indeed, the use of the cubicle and detention cup is a standard measure we employ for students who consistently misbehave. It's designed to give them time to reflect on their actions." Janelle couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Standard measure? You're telling me it's standard practice to isolate a 6-year-old child and publicly shame them in front of their peers?" "Mrs. Thompson," Miss Franklin interjected, her tone cold, "Daniel has been consistently disruptive in class. He talks out of turn, doesn't follow directions, and distracts other students. This punishment was not arbitrary." Janelle turned to face the teacher, her voice tight with controlled anger. "And you believe that justifies what you did? He's a child, Miss Franklin. Children talk. They get excited. They make mistakes. That's part of growing up." "Be that as it may," Principal Watkins said, "we have a responsibility to maintain order in our classrooms. Sometimes more stringent measures are necessary." Janelle leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "More stringent measures? Tell me, Mr. Watkins, Miss Franklin, how many other children have you subjected to this stringent measure?" There was a moment of uncomfortable silence. Miss Franklin shifted in her seat while Principal Watkins cleared his throat. "Well," the principal began, "we don't keep exact records of—" "Don't you?" Janelle interrupted. "Because I find it hard to believe that every child who talks out of turn or gets a little too excited ends up isolated in a cardboard box with a scarlet letter on their lunch table." Miss Franklin's face flushed. "Mrs. Thompson, I assure you we treat all students equally, regardless of their race?" Janelle shot back. "Because I'm beginning to see a pattern here. A pattern of black children and other minorities being punished more harshly for the same behaviors that white children get away with." Miss Franklin bristled. "That is absolutely not true. I treat all my students equally, regardless of their race." Janelle turned to face the teacher, her eyes boring into the teacher. "Do you? Then explain to me why Daniel, who by your own admission was just talking out of turn, ended up in that humiliating situation while other children who do the same thing get off with a warning." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Principal Watkins cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Thompson, I understand you're upset, but these are very serious allegations. We can't just—" "Can't what?" Janelle cut him off. "Can't acknowledge that there might be a problem? Can't admit that maybe, just maybe, there's a bias at work here that's hurting children like my son?" She stood up, her voice rising with passion. "Do you have any idea what this kind of treatment does to a child? Do you understand how it crushes their spirit, makes them feel like they're bad or wrong just for being who they are?" Janelle's words seemed to echo in the small office. She could see the discomfort on Principal Watkins' face, the defensive anger on Miss Franklin's, but she wasn't done yet. "My son," she continued, her voice thick with emotion, "my beautiful, bright, curious son came home from school yesterday and told me he didn't want to go back. A child who used to love learning, who used to be excited about school every single day, now dreads it. Do you know why?" She didn't wait for an answer. "Because he's been made to feel like he doesn't belong, like he's a problem, like there's something wrong with him for being who he is." Janelle turned to Miss Franklin, her eyes boring into the teacher. "You're supposed to nurture these children, to help them grow and learn. Instead, you're crushing their spirits, making them feel small and unworthy." And for what? Because they don't fit into your narrow idea of how a good student should behave. Miss Franklin opened her mouth to respond, but Janelle held up a hand. No, I'm not finished. I want you both to understand something. This isn't just about Daniel. It's about every child in this school who's been made to feel less than, who's been punished more harshly because of the color of their skin. She turned back to Principal Watkins. And you, Mr. Watkins, you've allowed this to happen under your watch. You've turned a blind eye to the damage being done to these children, to their self-esteem, to their love of learning. The principal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Mrs. Thompson, I assure you, if there's been any unfair treatment or racial bias in our disciplinary practices, we will root it out and correct it. Janelle interrupted. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Principal Watkins called for them to enter, and the school secretary poked her head in. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said, looking nervous. But there are several parents here asking to speak with you, Mr. Watkins. They say it's urgent. Janelle's eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this, but a part of her felt a surge of hope. Maybe she wasn't alone in this fight after all. Principal Watkins looked flustered. I'm in the middle of a meeting. I think you should hear what they have to say, Janelle said firmly, because I have a feeling their stories might sound very familiar. The principal hesitated for a moment and then nodded. Very well, send them in. The door opened wider and a group of parents filed in. Janelle recognized some of them. Other black parents, Hispanic parents, a Muslim mother she'd seen at school events. Their faces were a mix of anger, worry, and determination. One of the fathers, a tall black man Janelle knew as Mr. Johnson, spoke first. Mr. Watkins, we're here because we've heard about what happened to Daniel Thompson, and we're here to tell you it's not an isolated incident. A Hispanic mother nodded, her eyes fierce. My daughter Maria was put in that box too for speaking Spanish to her friend during lunch. And my son, another black mother added. He was given detention for a week for talking back when all he did was ask why he was being punished for something the white kids in his class do all the time. As the stories poured out, Janelle felt a mix of vindication and heartbreak. She wasn't alone in this fight, but the scope of the problem was larger than she'd imagined. She turned back to Principal Watkins and Miss Franklin, who both looked shell-shocked. Do you see now? Janelle said, her voice quiet but intense. This isn't just about Daniel. It's not just one incident, one teacher, one child. It's a systemic problem, and it's hurting our children every single day. The room fell silent as her words sank in. Principal Watkins' face had gone pale, while Miss Franklin looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Janelle took a deep breath, then spoke again, her voice filled with determination. This ends now. We want a full investigation into the disciplinary practices at this school. We want accountability for the harm that's been done to our children, and we want change, real, meaningful change, that ensures every child in this school is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race. She looked around at the other parents, saw the nods of agreement, the looks of support. Then she turned back to Principal Watkins. Well, Mr. Watkins, she said, what are you going to do about this? The principal looked overwhelmed, his eyes darting between the angry parents and the increasingly uncomfortable Miss Franklin. Finally, he cleared his throat. I had no idea this was happening on such a scale, he said, his voice shaky. Mrs. Thompson, everyone, you have my word that we will conduct a thorough investigation into these allegations. If there has been any unfair treatment or racial bias in our disciplinary practices, we will root it out and correct it. Janelle nodded, but her expression remained stern. That's a start, Mr. Watkins, but it's not enough. We need concrete actions, not just promises. We need to see real change, and we need to see it now. She turned to address all the parents in the room. We're not going to let this go. We're going to keep fighting until every child in this school feels safe, valued, and respected. Who's with me? The response was immediate and unanimous. Every parent in the room voiced their agreement, their faces set with determination. Janelle turned back to Principal Watkins and Miss Franklin. This is just the beginning, she said, her voice firm. We're going to hold you accountable. We're going to make sure that what happened to our children never happens again. And we're not going to stop until the school becomes a place where every child, regardless of their race, can thrive and learn without fear." As she finished speaking, Janelle felt a sense of purpose washing over her. This fight was far from over, but they had taken the first crucial step. They had uncovered the truth, brought it into the light where it could no longer be ignored or denied. Now the real work began, the work of changing a system, of healing the wounds inflicted on their children, of building a school and a world where every child could feel valued, respected, and free to be themselves. As Janelle left the office, the other parents following closely behind, she saw Daniel waiting for her, his eyes wide questioning. She knelt down beside him, pulling him into a tight hug. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered, her voice filled with fierce love and determination. "Mama's going to make sure of it. We all are." And as she held her son, Janelle knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. But it was a journey worth taking for Daniel, for all the children who had suffered in silence, and for the future they all deserved. The truth had been uncovered. Now it was time to use that truth to create change. As the days passed and no serious action was taken from the school, Janelle decided to take matters into her own hands. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of papers, her laptop open in front of her. The events of the past few days had lit a fire within her, and she was determined to turn that energy into action. She picked up her phone and dialed a number. "Hello, Mrs. Johnson? This is Janelle Thompson, Daniel's mom. I was wondering if you had a moment to talk about what happened at the school." Over the next few hours, Janelle made call after call, reaching out to every parent she knew from Daniel's school. With each conversation, her resolve grew stronger. "We're organizing a protest," she explained to Mr. Ramirez, whose daughter had also faced unfair treatment, "this Saturday in front of the school. We need to show them that we won't stand for this kind of discrimination anymore." As the sun began to set, Janelle's living room had transformed into a makeshift command center. Parents and community leaders filled the space, their voices rising and falling as they planned their next moves. "We need to start a petition," suggested Mrs. Lee, a local business owner whose grandson attended the school. "Demand that they reevaluate their punishment policies and get Miss Franklin some serious diversity training." Janelle nodded, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "I'm on it. We'll set up an online petition and start gathering signatures tonight. We need to show the school board that this isn't just a few angry parents. This is the whole community demanding change." As the meeting wound down, Janelle felt a surge of hope. They had a plan, they had numbers, and most importantly, they had the righteous anger of parents determined to protect their children. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Janelle stood in front of her mirror, smoothing down her shirt and taking a deep breath. Today was the day of the protest, and she knew it would be a turning point. As she drove Daniel to his grandmother's house, she explained what was happening. "Mama and a lot of other parents are going to stand up for what's right today, baby. We're going to make sure that what happened to you never happens to another child." Daniel's eyes were wide as he nodded. "Are you going to yell at Miss Franklin, Mama?" Janelle couldn't help but smile. "No, sweetie, we're not going to yell. We're going to use our voices to speak up for what's right. Sometimes that's more powerful than yelling." As Janelle approached the school, her heart swelled. The street was filled with people, parents, students, community members. Many held signs: "Education, not humiliation," "Equal treatment for all students," "Stop the bias." She made her way to the front of the crowd, where a makeshift podium had been set up. Taking a deep breath, she stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice strong and clear. "We're here today because our children deserve better. They deserve a school where they are treated with respect, where they are valued for who they are, not judged by the color of their skin." As Janelle spoke, she noticed movement at the edge of the crowd. A news van had pulled up, a reporter and cameraman quickly setting up their equipment. "We demand that the school board take immediate action," Janelle continued, her voice gaining strength. "We want a full review of disciplinary policies. We want accountability for those who have allowed this discrimination to continue, and we want Miss Franklin to undergo comprehensive diversity and empathy training." The crowd cheered, their voices rising in agreement. Janelle felt a tap on her shoulder and turned to see the news reporter gesturing for an interview. "Mrs. Thompson," the reporter said, her microphone at the ready, "can you tell us what sparked this protest?" Janelle nodded, her eyes meeting the camera lens. "It started with my son, Daniel. He was subjected to cruel and humiliating punishment, isolated from his peers and publicly shamed. But as we dug deeper, we discovered this wasn't an isolated incident. Black and minority students in our school have been facing harsher punishments for the same behaviors that barely get white students a slap on the wrist." The reporter's eyes widened. "That's a serious allegation. How has the school responded so far?" "With empty promises," Janelle replied, her voice firm. "But we're here to show them that we won't accept that anymore. We're demanding real change, and we won't stop until we get it." As the interview concluded, Janelle noticed more news vans arriving. Her story was spreading, gaining traction beyond their small community. Throughout the day, Janelle gave interview after interview. She shared Daniel's story but also made sure to highlight the experiences of other families. With each retelling, the injustice became clearer, the need for change more urgent. By evening, Janelle's phone was buzzing constantly with notifications. Their petition had gone viral, gathering thousands of signatures from across the country. Social media was ablaze with discussions about racial bias in schools, with many sharing their own stories of discrimination. As she scrolled through the messages of support, Janelle felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. They were being heard. The truth was coming out. Now it was time for the school to respond. The next morning, Janelle's phone rang early. It was Mrs. Lee. "Janelle, turn on the news. The school board is making a statement." Janelle quickly switched on her TV, her heart pounding. On screen, she saw Mr. Watkins standing at a podium, flanked by members of the school board. His face was grave as he began to speak. "In light of recent events and the concerns raised by our community, the school board has decided to take immediate action," he announced. "We will be conducting a thorough review of all our disciplinary policies and practices, with a focus on identifying and eliminating any racial biases." Janelle leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. Furthermore, Mr. Watkins continued, "We want to extend a sincere apology to Daniel Thompson and his family, as well as to any other students who have experienced unfair treatment in our school. We are committed to implementing new measures to ensure that no student is ever subjected to such treatment again." Janelle felt tears pricking at her eyes. It was a start, a real acknowledgement of the problem, but she knew the fight wasn't over yet. As if reading her mind, Mr. Watkins cleared his throat and continued, "Lastly, we want to address the concerns raised about Miss Franklin's conduct. Effective immediately, Miss Franklin has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into her actions." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Janelle sat back, a mix of emotions washing over her. It was more than she had dared to hope for, but she knew it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, Janelle found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The school board, true to their word, had launched a comprehensive review of their policies. Janelle and other parent representatives were invited to participate in the process, offering their perspectives and experiences. "We need to focus on restorative justice practices," Janelle argued during one particularly heated meeting. "Punishment doesn't teach our children how to do better. It just teaches them to fear making mistakes." The other parents nodded in agreement, and slowly, painfully, change began to take shape. New policies were drafted, emphasizing fairness, consistency, and respect for all students. A system of checks and balances was put in place to monitor disciplinary actions for any signs of bias. As for Miss Franklin, the investigation into her conduct revealed a pattern of biased behavior that stretched back years. In the end, the school board made the decision not to renew her contract for the following year. "It's not about punishing Miss Franklin," Janelle explained to Daniel one evening. "It's about making sure that teachers understand the impact of their actions on students. It's about creating a school where every child feels safe and valued. Daniel nodded solemnly. Do you think things will be better now, Mama? Janelle pulled him close, planting a kiss on top of his head. I think they will. Maybe it won't happen overnight, but we've taken the first big step, and we're going to keep working to make things better. Not just for you, but for all the children in our community. As the school year drew to a close, Janelle stood in front of her mirror once again. This time, she was preparing for a different kind of gathering. The school had organized a community meeting to present their new policies and to have an open dialogue about moving forward. When Janelle arrived at the school auditorium, she was amazed at the turnout. Parents, teachers, students, and community members filled the space, their faces a mix of hope and determination. Mr. Watkins took the stage, looking both nervous and resolute. Good evening, everyone. We're here tonight to share the changes we've made and to listen to your thoughts and concerns as we move forward. As the meeting progressed, Janelle felt a sense of cautious optimism. The new policies weren't perfect, but they were a significant improvement. More importantly, there was a genuine commitment to ongoing dialogue and improvement. When it was Janelle's turn to speak, she stood tall, her voice clear and strong. What we've accomplished here is just the beginning, she said. Real change takes time, effort, and constant vigilance. But I believe we've laid the foundation for a school where every child can thrive, regardless of the color of their skin. She paused, looking out over the sea of faces. This journey has taught me something important. It's taught me that when we stand together, when we refuse to be silent in the face of injustice, we can create real change. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's possible. As Janelle finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. She felt a tugging at her hand and looked down to see Daniel, his eyes shining with pride. You did it, Mama, he whispered. You made things better. Janelle knelt down, pulling Daniel into a tight hug. No, baby, she said softly. We did it. All of us. Together. As they left the meeting that night, hand in hand, Janelle knew that their fight was far from over. There would be more challenges ahead, more battles to be fought. But she also knew that they had started something important, something that would ripple out beyond their school, beyond their community. They had shown that change was possible, that injustice could be confronted and overcome. And in doing so, they had given hope, not just to Daniel, but to countless other children who deserved a fair chance at education and success. As they walked under the starry sky, Janelle felt a sense of peace settle over her. They had taken action, and that action had led to real, tangible change. It wasn't the end of their journey, but it was a powerful new beginning. And as she looked down at Daniel and saw the hope and confidence shining in his eyes, Janelle knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. For her son, for all the children in their community, and for the promise of a more just and equitable future, she would keep fighting, keep pushing for change, one step at a time. The road ahead might be long, but they were on it together, moving forward with determination, hope, and the unshakable belief that every child deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. And that, Janelle thought, was the most powerful lesson of all. As the weeks turned into months, Janelle watched with a mixture of pride and cautious optimism as the changes they had fought so hard for began to take root in their school. The new policies were implemented gradually, with regular check-ins and adjustments based on feedback from students, parents, and teachers. Daniel, once hesitant and withdrawn, now bounded out of bed each morning, excited for school. Mama, guess what we're learning today? He'd exclaim, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. Janelle's heart swelled every time she saw that spark in her son's eyes, knowing how close they had come to losing it forever. But it wasn't just Daniel who was thriving. Janelle began to hear stories from other parents about positive changes in their children's attitudes toward school. Mrs. Ramirez shared how her daughter Maria was no longer afraid to speak Spanish with her friends during lunch. Mr. Johnson's son had joined the debate club, finding his voice and confidence in a supportive environment. One sunny afternoon, as Janelle picked Daniel up from school, she noticed a new face among the teachers supervising the dismissal. A young black woman with a warm smile was high-fiving students as they left. That's Miss Carter, Mama, Daniel explained excitedly. She's our new diversity coordinator. She comes to our class sometimes and teaches us about different cultures and how to be kind to everyone. Janelle smiled, remembering the heated discussions during school board meetings about the need for more diverse staff and culturally responsive teaching. It was heartening to see those ideas becoming a reality. As they walked to the car, Janelle noticed a colorful mural on the school wall that hadn't been there before. It depicted children of various ethnicities, abilities, and backgrounds all holding hands under a rainbow. The words, "Every child matters," were painted in bold letters across the top. "We helped paint that," Daniel said proudly. "Miss Carter said it's to remind everyone that our differences make us special, not separate." Janelle felt a lump in her throat. This was the school she had dreamed of for her son, for all children. A place where diversity was celebrated, not penalized. But even as she rejoiced in these positive changes, Janelle knew their work was far from over. There were still challenges to face, ingrained attitudes to overcome. Not everyone in the community had been supportive of the changes. Some parents complained that the new policies were too lenient, that discipline was being sacrificed in the name of political correctness. Janelle found herself once again at the forefront of these discussions, but this time as a mediator rather than an instigator. She organized community dialogues, bringing together people with different viewpoints to find common ground. "We all want what's best for our children," she would say during these meetings. "We may disagree on the methods, but our goal is the same. Let's focus on that and work together to create a school where every child can succeed." Slowly but surely, even some of the most resistant parents began to see the benefits of the new approach. Test scores were improving across the board. Disciplinary incidents had decreased significantly, and most importantly, children were happier, more engaged and more excited about learning. As the school year drew to a close, Janelle received an unexpected invitation. The superintendent of schools wanted her to speak at a district-wide conference about their school's transformation. Standing at the podium, looking out at a sea of educators from across the district, Janelle felt a mix of nervousness and determination. This was an opportunity to spread their message even further, to inspire change on a larger scale. "A year ago," she began, "I stood in front of our school, angry and heartbroken over the treatment of my son and other minority students. Today, I stand here filled with hope and pride at what we've accomplished together." She went on to share their journey, the challenges they faced, the resistance they encountered, and the breakthroughs they achieved. She spoke of the importance of listening to parents and students, of creating policies that uplift rather than punish, and of the transformative power of inclusivity and respect. "But our work is not done," she concluded. "What we've achieved in our school is just the beginning. Every child in every school deserves to feel valued, respected, and empowered to learn. It's up to all of us, educators, parents, and community members, to make that a reality." The applause that followed was thunderous. As Janelle stepped down from the stage, she was approached by educators from other schools eager to learn more about their methods and implement similar changes in their own districts. That evening, as Janelle tucked Daniel into bed, he asked her a question that made her pause. "Mama, are you proud of me?" Janelle sat on the edge of his bed, stroking his curly hair. "Of course I am, baby. I'm proud of you every single day. Why do you ask?" Daniel's eyes were serious as he looked up at her. "Because I'm proud of you, Mama. You made things better. Not just for me, but for everyone. You're my hero." Tears welled up in Janelle's eyes as she pulled Daniel into a tight hug. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're my hero too. Your bravery in speaking up about what happened to you started all of this. We did this together." As she held her son, Janelle reflected on their journey. From that terrible day in the lunchroom to this moment of triumph, they had come so far, but she knew that their story was just one chapter in a much larger narrative of struggle and progress. The next morning, Janelle received a call from a national education magazine. They wanted to feature their school's transformation in an upcoming issue, highlighting it as a model for addressing systemic racism in education. As she hung up the phone, Janelle felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. Their story had the potential to inspire change on an even larger scale, But with that came the responsibility to continue pushing forward, to never become complacent. In the months that followed, Janelle found herself traveling to speak at education conferences, consulting with other school districts, and even testifying before the state legislature on the need for comprehensive education reform. Through it all, she never forgot why she had started this journey. For Daniel and for all the children who deserved a chance to learn and grow in an environment of respect and dignity. As another school year began, Janelle stood with Daniel at the entrance to the school. The atmosphere was markedly different from a year ago. Children of all backgrounds chatted and laughed together. Teachers greeted each student by name, and parents lingered to chat with each other and the staff. "Ready for another great year?" Janelle asked, squeezing Daniel's hand. He grinned up at her, his eyes shining. "You bet, Mama. I can't wait." As she watched Daniel bound up the steps, high-fiving Miss Carter on his way in, Janelle felt a sense of peace wash over her. They had faced injustice head-on and come out stronger. They had turned anger and pain into positive change. And most importantly, they had shown that when a community comes together with determination and love, anything is possible. Janelle knew that their journey wasn't over. There would always be more work to do, more minds to open, more hearts to touch. But as she turned to walk back to her car, she carried with her the certainty that they were on the right path. The story of Janelle and Daniel, of their school and their community, would continue to unfold, but it would do so on a foundation of respect, equality, and the unwavering belief that every child deserves the chance to shine. And as Janelle drove away, she smiled, knowing that somewhere out there, another parent, another child, another community was standing up and saying enough. Their story would inspire others just as others had inspired them. And so the cycle of change would continue, one brave voice at a time. The end of this chapter was just the beginning of a larger story, a story of hope, perseverance, and the power of love to overcome injustice. It was a story that would continue to be written, not just by Janelle and Daniel, but by all those who believe in the promise of a better, more equitable world for all children.